Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ushma Neal. I'm the Vice President for Education here at MSK, and I'd like to welcome you to the first time we've ever hosted Story Collider here at MSK. I like to bill myself as a scientific communicator, and I love the embrace of scientific and medical communication that has occurred in this community through even just thinking about hosting this event. My colleague Yahara Fortis and I ran a storytelling class together with Avis Meehan, our Senior Vice President for Communications here. So the support for talking about our science and our medicine and our work goes through this whole organization, and we are thrilled to have Story Collider here to help us on this journey tonight. I'm going to sit down and turn it over to the professionals, both your storytellers. We can't wait to hear everything that you're here to talk about tonight, and make sure that you have access to Kleenex, by the way. I'd like to introduce Erin Barker, the Artistic Director for Story Collider, and Mariam Zellinghalam, who is one of the senior producers, I don't want to downgrade your title, for Story Collider. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction and for having us.
Hello, everybody. So by a round of applause, who is at a Story Collider show for the very first time tonight?
Not too shabby.
Quite a few people. Well, that makes sense because this is our very first show in partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering. So I think we should probably tell you a little bit about what you're in for. The Story Collider presents live on stage true personal stories about science. And what is it not going to be, Mariam?
You're not going to learn anything here. Tonight, you're just going to get in that ooey gooey, gushy feeling space.
That's right. There's not going to be any slides back here. This podium is off limits. No laser pointers. Just people standing at this microphone telling you their true personal stories about science. So the first rule of Story Collider is...
I gave it away. There is no learning.
That's right. There is no learning at the Story Collider. We're just going to have a lot of feelings about science tonight. We're going to go on an emotional journey with science. So as has been pointed out, to help you with that emotional journey, there are tissue boxes stationed throughout the theater strategically. But we're
Use them well.
We're also going to laugh. We're also going to have our hearts warmed tonight. It's not going to be all tears all the time.
Yeah, and they might be tears of joy and hope and inspiration.
There you go.
Yeah. Many kinds of tears will be shed.
So we've been really excited to work with the MSK community to share these 5 stories with you tonight. And medicine is really close to my heart in particular right now because I'm coming off the tail end of a sinus infection. Everyone sharing this mic with me, don't worry. I've got a lot of antibacterial hand gel that I've been using. But last week, we were presenting a show in Boise, Idaho. We do about 60 shows every year all throughout the English-speaking world. So I was traveling on a couple of flights out to Boise. And here's a fun science fact. If you have a sinus infection and you go on a flight with a great deal of turbulence, something that can happen to you is your eardrum can rupture. I did not know this. So when my brain exploded and trickled out my ear, it came as a surprise to me. Normally when we go to new locations, I like to explore, I like to get a sense of the place, visit the attractions. On this trip, I got to visit such attractions as Boise's St. Luke's Urgent Care, partake of such delicacies as Mucinex and amoxicillin from the local providers. You should know, if you're ever in Boise, the downtown Rite Aid has a luxurious and diverse selection of Kleenex. I highly recommend it. I got
Seems
the
like
kind.
a few people in the audience are familiar with the Boise Rite Aid.
Have you all been to Boise? I got the kind of Kleenex that is infused with Vicks VapoRub, which I was very excited about. Highly innovative. But our theme tonight is not sinus infections. It is, in fact, resilience.
So rising above the sinus infections.
That's right. And in fact, I did. And I am standing here before you all today, having survived this ordeal.
Yeah, so as I was thinking about resilience, I was thinking it brought me back to my college application days, as many things bring me back to. Because I think that
It's that time of year.
Yeah, it is that time of year. Get them in, kids. And as I was, and I believe that I am owed the award for the most cliche college essay of all time, because I wrote about literally falling off a horse and getting back on it. And so I grew up riding horses. I think my parents must have thought it was some sort of phase that I just never grew out of, to the dismay of their wallets. But I got really into competitive show jumping, which is a fun fact about me, or at least I think it's fun.
Learning so much about you.
I know, we're going on a journey already. And I had this horse named Bailey, and his full name was True to Your Word. And we...
Wait, how is Bailey short for True to
I
Your
have
Word?
no idea.
Okay.
Honestly, I have no idea. But it's just easier to say Bailey when he does something wrong, like throw me off his back, which he did multiple times. So he really understood the laws of gravity and physics, and so he had this uncanny ability to ball himself up over a jump and then stretch himself out afterwards. And so I'd go shooting right over his neck and onto the ground. And my dad, who used to come with me to go riding, got so accustomed to this that every time I would tumble off, he would say, "Oh, she's fallen off again." And instead of coming to help me, he would run after the horse, who is inevitably outside grazing on the grass. Very smart guy. And so through grit and determination, I finally got strong enough to not fall off of Bailey's back. And that is what I wrote my college essay about. And the only remarkable thing about this essay was that I got into college at all. Yeah. And so I'm so excited to have our storytellers here tonight who have far better, more compelling, more incredible stories of resilience to share with you all.
Yes, are you ready to hear some less literal stories about falling off horses and getting back on? Yeah? Are we ready for the first story? Wonderful. So our first storyteller is a senior communications associate here at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I think I'm going to let her explain the rest, tell the rest of her story. Please welcome Mia Garchitorena. Did I say it right? Mia Garchitorena to the stage.
So both my parents are ER doctors, and whenever we would have dinner, they would always talk about some of the gruesome things that they did at work. You know, popping in a guy's eyeball that was hanging by a thread, you know, draining giant abscesses on a guy's back, or, you know, flushing out some cockroach larva that was in a woman's tongue after she licked off the glue off of a letter. That was my favorite one. So my two younger brothers and I grew up with these kinds of stories. And, you know, when a babysitter wasn't around, my parents would bring me and my younger brothers to their doctor's lounges to sleep over during school nights or weekends. So, you know, we grew up sleeping at the doctor's lounges, playing in there, all of that. And, you know, we became friends with a lot of the doctors and nurses there. And the doctor's lounges became, you know, a second home. So a lot of the times I would take my mom's ID and walk through the ER doors, just hang out with the nurses, talk with them. Sometimes I was allowed to go into my dad's ER and just take out the popsicles out of the kitchen, just go right back to the lounge and hang out. Sometimes, you know, I would just trot around the hospital and, you know, make friends and ask them questions from my own science book and see if they knew as much as I did. But I was just so proud to be the kid of an ER doctor or two ER doctors. And I saw that they had really good colleagues. They had really great camaraderie among their colleagues. And I knew that I wanted to be in that field. I wanted to grow up in medicine. So by the time I was 5, I knew I was going to be a doctor. I didn't doubt that goal until November 2nd, 2007. I was 16 and a junior in high school. At that point, I was growing up very shy and awkward, but I figured I didn't really need to make friends because I was too busy thinking about becoming a doctor. I was in algebra, and I was speaking to a friend behind me, and I was gloating about how I was going to apply to the 6-year med program at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is essentially a program where high school students can apply for med school, attend 6 years of med school, and by the time they're done, they're a doctor. And so I was gloating to my friend. I was saying, my mom did this program, my aunt did this program, they did really well, they were doctors by the time they were 22. Obviously, I'm going to get in. And she looked at me with a blank stare, and she said, "The deadline was yesterday." My heart sunk, and my stomach just turned, and my whole face went cold. First, I was just completely mortified that I was gloating about getting into med school before even applying. And then also, how did she know more about the deadline than I did? And then third, what were my parents going to say? How was I going to tell them that I missed the deadline? I ran through some options of not telling them, applying late, hoping for the best. But I knew I had to tell them because the guilt would just eat up at me. So that day, I went home and I waited until dinner to tell them that I missed the deadline. That turned into me sitting at the dinner table with both of them on either side screaming at me for 2 hours. And it was such a horrible experience. I was just sitting there listening. And like the teenager I was, I said, well, maybe I don't want to go to med school. And that turned into more screaming. And I didn't mean it. I did want to become a doctor. I wanted to be the doctor that they were. But yeah, so it just turned into a huge screaming fest. My mom's solution was for me to call up admissions and ask them if I could turn in my application and still be considered for the program. So that's what I did. I called admissions and I asked them, can I still apply? Is it too late? They said, we'll consider your application if you fax it to us. 2007, and so I was like, okay, I'll fax it to you. So I went straight upstairs to the old clunky fax machine on the second floor. And the thing is, I had to print out the application, 10 pages of a med school application. And you can't email it or anything, so I had to write everything by hand, including my personal statement, which was probably longer than 2,000 words. And I wrote it in the tiniest little letters as I could. And fax machines, I had to just, patiently fax every single page of my med school application. And after a while, it took a long time, I was done. The next morning, I call admissions, and I say, did you receive it? Like, is everything okay? A woman answered, and she said, yes, we received it, but it's all smudgy. We can't read it. The fax machine just made it weird. Can you send it again? I was like, okay, again. Took the fax machine, all 10 pages, slowly, tried to, send it as quickly as possible. I called her again. Is it okay? Is it legible? No, I can't read it at all. So I told my mom, and her solution was, we are going to drive to admissions, and you're going to ask her to review your application in person and tell you to your face whether you can get into this program. I was like, okay, Mom. So we jumped into the car, we drove 30 minutes downtown to Kansas City to the admissions office up a winding hill. The woman on the fax's receiving side answered, and she brought us to this old 70s looking wooden office. I sat in a law office looking chair, and my mom sat behind me at the wall, patiently waiting. And so there I was, just waiting, watching her review my application. Now, I didn't get into med school, but one thing that she did tell me was that my personal statement was really well written and very compelling. And that stuck with me, all throughout high school and, beyond. So that, despite that experience, I applied to a college and I got in, and I was just going to take the regular route of doing pre-med, 4 years, and then hopefully getting into med school. But college was a monster that I grossly underestimated, especially pre-med. One, my bio and chem classes were all 300-person auditoriums. And my math classes, all of the homework and tests were taken online. And, the camaraderie that I saw with my parents and their colleagues, I didn't see that in pre-med. Everybody was gossiping about each other and asking each other about their grades. And one time my roommate told everybody in class that the reason why I was crying in chem class was because I failed my exam. And it was just so hard to deal with because pre-med and biology and chemistry were things that I really wanted to do. I really wanted to be a doctor. And I knew in my heart that I was going to be a doctor. And it was just so hard to see that every single time I took a test, D's, F, D, F. And it was just a big blow. It felt like a bad dream where I was just clawing my way out of a crumbling pit. And so for the next 3 years, I was taking and retaking these classes. So around my junior year of college, I was starting to think about, writing and medicine and writing, and if there were careers about, medical editing, medical writing. And I was really interested in learning stories about doctors and nurses and telling stories about medicine and finding out what it was really like within the hospital setting. And so I started dabbling around, looking into, medical publishing, medical editing. And I had one class, it was called Mind, Medicine, and Victorian Literature. And that really opened up my mind and opened up my eyes to, medical writing, that it was actually a career that people could do. And just, it was nice to see how medicine could influence people's lives and just even their writing styles. And so I decided to switch my major from bio to English. And I started taking upper level literature courses. But gradually, I was coming up to the point where I had to tell my parents. And so I was really scared. I was hoping they were being going to be okay with it. They were going to not reject it. But surprisingly, they were very supportive. And they were really excited about the idea that I would be writing stories about their field and about medicine, and writing stories about doctors and nurses and what they had to say. So it was around that time that I started, dabbling in internships in medical writing, medical, publishing. And I took English. I switched to English. I aced all of my literature courses. And it was a great feeling that I was actually doing really well in school for the first time. But thanks to pre-med, I graduated with a 2.7 GPA. After graduating, I still was interning in medical marketing, medical editing, and it was around that time that I came upon the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism in New York City, which is a master's journalism program right next to the New York Times. I never really thought about journalism before. Journalism seemed like newspapers, tabloids. I didn't really think about it before. But their health and science concentration got me thinking that, maybe medical journalism was actually a career. Maybe I could do that. And so I applied to the program, and 4 months later, I got a call from Dean of Admissions. We received your application, and we reviewed your personal statement. It seems like you really wanted to go into medicine. Do you know anything about journalism? And for the second time in my life, my heart just sank and I just went cold. First off, I've never spoken to a journalist before. Second, I've never spoken to a New Yorker before. And her questions were so direct and upfront, I was totally taken aback. But I collected myself and I kept her on the phone for an hour. And I just basically explained to her that I wanted to write stories about medicine. I wanted to write personal stories from doctors and nurses and everybody in the healthcare field and see what kind of compelling stories that they had to tell. I wanted the public to know what made them become doctors, what made them tick, how hospitals, operated. And the conversation got better, and I think she heard the determination in my voice, but that night, I cried on my parents' bed, and I said, I am not going to get into this program. I'm not moving to New York. There's no way. The next morning, it was bright and sunny. I took out my phone, opened up my email, and as soon as I read the words, "We are pleased to announce," I jumped up. I ran to my parents' bed. I said, I got in. I'm moving to New York. And they were so happy that we got dressed and went to Starbucks. And so we were sitting at a table, eating snacks, just chilling. And we were all very quiet. But then my dad started crying. And then my mom started crying. And I started crying. And we were crying happy tears because it was the first time in my life that I felt like every setback that I had endured brought me up to this point, and that the cloud of failure completely dissolved away. And my dad turned to me and he said, "We are so proud of you. Our little girl is going to be a journalist."
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Mia. Oh, that was great. I could feel a lot of people in the room relating to the application ordeals.
Yeah, applications are a real conundrum, especially if you haven't fallen off a horse.
What else is there to write about?
Yeah, and working with Mia, I related so much to her story because my own mom happens to be a medical doctor, and I was filled with so much pride whenever I would go to the hospital with her. And I looked just like her, especially when I was a kid. And so I was really excited every time she would call me her little mini-me. And the first job that I ever had was when I was 12 years old, and I would do her billings for her because I was really good at Excel. I really had a passion.
When you were 12?
When I was 12,
Oh, no.
I really loved the Microsoft suite before I turned over to the Apple products. But my mom always told me, despite how much I enjoyed being in the doctor's office with her and in the hospital with her, that I should never, ever become a doctor. Because my mom is afflicted with far too much empathy. She's one of those doctors who gives her personal home phone number to her patients because she just cares and is so kind and caring for them. And so that meant that we were getting phone calls at all hours of the night from patients who desperately needed to know whether it was okay to eat this or if this pain was a normal phenomenon. And so she could see in me that I was also afflicted with the same over-feelingness quality.
Which is why you work for Story Collider.
Which is why I work for Story Collider. That's the arc of the story. And so I decided instead that I was going to become a biologist, because if I wasn't going to cure patients through being a doctor, I might as well work on cures at the cutting edge. And this was all well and good until it came the time for me to apply for PhD programs, at which point my mom asked me, "Hey, so when are you going to take the MCAT? I think you should really consider an MD PhD." I think probably because she looked up the salaries of how much research scientists make and was appalled. And so I was just really flustered and confused because this was something that I had never considered, but I'm really desperate not to let my parents down. And so I was just I think I missed the deadline. Guess I'll just have to get a PhD now. And I'm sorry, Mom, who is in the audience right now, for lying to you.
Is your everyone's applauding to you for admitting you lied to your mom? Is your mom just finding out tonight that you did not take the MCAT?
I mean, she definitely knew that I didn't take the MCAT. I'm not sure, Mom. Did I ever tell you I lied?
To be
So
clear,
I'm sorry.
this is the second time Mariam has revealed live on stage to her mother that she lied to her about something. So eventually she's going to stop coming to our shows, I think.
But I think that we both have come to understand that medicine was just not the way that I was going to pursue my passion for spreadsheets. So in the end, it all works out.
Happy ending. Are y'all ready for our second story?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Me too. So our next storyteller is Gabrielle Duran, and he describes himself as a huge nerd and a pathological optimist. And he is currently a postdoctoral fellow here at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So give it up for Gabrielle Duran.
As I made my way to the hospital I was training at 5:30 in the morning on the last Friday of August of 2015, the biggest problem in my life was that I was sleep deprived. Very sleep deprived. But by the end of the day, it wouldn't be. You see, I was in my last year of medical school, and where I'm from, Colombia, our last year of medical school is also our intern year, which is the most demanding year of any medical training. And I was very deep into the most demanding rotation in my intern year, which was surgery. So I was getting to the hospital, and I did what I did every day. I called my dad. He ran a bit of land my family owned, 6 hours out of where we lived, and his farmer's dawn till dusk schedule, and my medical intern's dawn till God knows when schedule, meant that the only time we could talk was very early in the morning. They were usually short conversations, as he is your proverbial man of few words. How'd you sleep? How was your day? Have a great day. But it was kind of a thing. So I call him, and it rings and goes to voicemail. And that is kind of unusual, but I don't think much of it. He's supposed to come home that night, so I'll just give him shit for it when I see him. And also, I've arrived at the hospital, and unless I get moving, I'm going to start my day getting chewed out by my attending. And I usually aspire to delay that until at least lunchtime. It's 3 hours later, and I'm getting ready to go on rounds in the ER with the attending surgeon on call when I get a call. Probably my dad, right? Everyone else just texts these days. But it wasn't. It was actually a call from my home number, and on the other side of it is Merce, who has worked with my family since I was 6 months old. And she tells me, please try to stay calm, in a voice that very clearly wasn't. But it seems like your dad is missing, and we fear he might have been kidnapped. And I would like to say that my heart sunk, but the sensation was more of the walls of the room swallowing me whole. And I was flooded with questions. I mean, if you're familiar with Colombia, you know we have a troubled past as a country, and this was actually not that infrequent in the 90s, but this was 2015. Things were supposed to be better. Things were better. How could this possibly be happening right now? I was flooded with these and other questions that Merce was in no capacity to answer because she didn't know. So I hung up, and I called my mother, to whom my dad unironically refers to as the head of our household. And she was actually here in New York City at the time, helping one of my sisters move apartments. So damn be the international fees. I call her up, and is there anything you need me to do? Do I have to call, go, do anything? And she tells me that not right now. She's talking to the right people, making the right calls. We don't know much. We know that his silver Ram truck was found halfway between our house in the farm and the main road, and that there was 3 sets of boot prints leading from the car to a river. And that's pretty much it. She will let me know if she needs me to do anything, but at the moment, just stay close to the phone. And it was probably shock taking over, but I thought that the best thing I could do was pretend and carry on with my day as if nothing was happening. Because I felt that if I could hold on to a bit of normality, that would allow me to keep it together. This didn't take me very far though, because then I get a call from my other sister, Ana Lucia. I have 3 older sisters. Yes, I know, God bless me. And she is in town as I am, and she doesn't want to be alone. And that's when it hit me that this just wasn't happening to me or my dad or my mom. This was happening to all of my family at the same time. And if the best I could do was keep my sister company, that was exactly what I had to do. So I pick her up, and we go home, and we sit and try not to freak out every time the phone rings, and it wasn't really easy. The next day, my mom and other sister make their way back to Bogota, and my sister stay at home while we travel to the biggest city near where my father was taken. There, we are taken to the headquarters of the police's anti-extortion task force, and we meet Lieutenant Alexander Barreto, who we are told is in charge of our case, and who we are profusely told is the best in his line of work, and that we are in very good hands, which I couldn't help but think was funny, because it's something I, as a medical student and fake doctor, told patients all the time. And I can tell you right now, being on the receiving end, not great. And he tells us that his plan and his team is committed to getting our father back to us, safe and sound, without us paying anyone anything. And that all seems well and good. And he turns to my mother and asks her if she's been contacted yet. And she says she has not, probably because my father, and by extension the kidnappers, think she's still out of the country. Good, he says. Please turn off your cell phones. If they can't contact you, they can't pressure you, and that'll afford us time. And time is the most valuable thing you can give us right now. If they contact anyone else, please have them direct them to contact Gabriel. We're here, we'll coach him with what to say. And almost as if on cue, my phone starts ringing, and it's my sister, who came back with my mother from New York. And she is, to put it mildly, upset. And it's hard to make out what she's saying, but I managed to pull out the words, "My father called the house." It's the only number he knows by heart. "I didn't know what to do. I told him to call you." And we haven't even hung up, and I already have an incoming call from an unknown number. I show it to the lieutenant, and he says, "Yeah, that's them. Please put it on speaker." And what follows is one of the most bizarre, jarring conversations I've had with my father in my entire life. As I told you before, he is a man of few words, but his tone is usually one that conveys calm and wisdom and, fatherly things. This time, his tone is anxious, and his sentences are a lot shorter than they usually are. "Where is your mother? We need that money. I've worked something out." And on the other end of that, they are handing me all kinds of slips of paper with things to say and things to ask, and she's trying to make it back home, Dad, but she hasn't been able to, and how can we get that money if she isn't here? Please try to have them have some patience. And I feel like I am putting on the worst amateur theater performance ever with everything on the line. Turns out it wasn't as bad as I thought, because after a few rounds of this, the kidnappers, via my father, instruct us to keep trying to get a hold of my mother and tell us that they will call us back in 3 hours. "Gabriel," my father says to me as he is about to hang up, which was a bit jarring to begin with, because he never calls me by my full name. "If that money isn't here tomorrow, they are going to kill me." 3 hours come and go, and we don't get a call. And I am mildly worried. And the people from the police force are quick to tell us that this is a common tactic kidnappers employ to generate distress. And distress they very much did generate. So they start to regale my mother and I with stories of past successes and family reunifications to calm us down, but I tune out. I start thinking about my dad and whether they're treating him well, and whether I'm going to get to see him again and hug him again, and whether I said something I probably shouldn't have and got him killed. And I'm spiraling in these thoughts when a vibration in my pocket jabs me out of it, and it is another call from them, and here we go again. They apply pressure, I do my best to evade. And this goes on for 2 days. My mother and I shuttling back and forth between the police headquarters and our hotel room. Monday is the third day, and on Monday they tell us it's time to give them something so my mother can turn her phone back on. It's time for her to shoulder the calls. And I can't help but have very, very mixed feelings about this, because I am so relieved that I don't have to listen to my kidnapped father again. But now my mother has to, and I feel terrible giving this burden to her. But she is the rock of our household, and just her voice in any situation calms me down, and I'm sure it'll calm him down, and I try to cling to this. And things keep moving forward, and we manage to arrange for a partial drop, a down payment of a sort, if you will, in which we are going to give them some of the money they are asking for in exchange for my dad being released, and we promise to make ensuing payments. And that's all well and good, except that the moment of the drop on Tuesday night comes, and the person the kidnappers instructed to help them pick up the money doesn't show up. And now it's midnight on Tuesday, and we have no idea what's going on. And we are in our hotel room after my mother has gone to be stood up by this person. And I'm losing my mind, and the police agents are painfully calm. And this reminds me of every time I've told patients that everything's been done as it should and that they should just be calm. And I can't help but think about how I hate being on the receiving end again, and I just start seething with rage because it's not their fault, but why are they so calm when I'm not? And at about 1 a.m., one of the police agents turns to us and tells us that we need to go down to the headquarters again because we might need to make a decision. And I should probably mention that when we met Lieutenant Barreto at the first time, he told us that if they ever saw an opportunity where they could have an operation and extract my father with 100% chance of success, they would take it, no questions asked. If they saw it not so high in their success rate, they might consult us into the decision they're making. And that's what I have in my head as we're going to the headquarters. And we get there, and this old, unassuming brick house is just teeming with activity. There are more lights than I have seen and more people than I have seen around it in the last 5 days of my life, which feel like 5 years. And I look at all this and I think, decision my ass. Something's happened. And they lead us into this room, which is just full of all kinds of divisions of agents. I have never seen so many shades of green. And right there, in the middle of them, sporting the same Levi's 503 jeans that he does every time he goes to the farm, and wearing a very ugly 5-day beard, is my father. And I have no idea what's going on, but I don't really care. I just run up and hug him. Turns out that while all this madness with the drop and everything was going on, about 100 miles away, a police reconnaissance vehicle had unexpectedly come closer to where they were holding him than they thought. When the kidnappers saw the headlights from afar, they, I believe the technical term is, freaked out and ran, leaving him there with the promise of subsequent payments. So they had picked him up and taken him to where we were, and it was police protocol, or in my vision, intolerable cruelty, to not mention that that had happened until we were in the same room. And the next day we make our way back home, as my father should have on his own 5 days earlier, and we try to get a little bit of normality back. And I blink, and it's a year later, and it's once again the end of August, 2016 this time, and I'm no longer an intern. I've graduated. I'm a full-fledged doctor under the eyes of Colombian law, and I am now packing my bags, and I'm trying to fit as much of my life as I can into a single suitcase. Something like the kind of thing that happened to us with my father is the type of thing that makes you pause in life and really think hard about what you're doing, what you want, and how life can turn on 10 words. And I thought that it was a moment for me to really assess what I wanted to do and where I wanted to move forward in life as a doctor and a human being. And the opportunity came up to come and do research in brain cancer here at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which was something I had always been fascinated with, so I took it, and I was flying out the next day to start a new life in New York. I know you're probably wondering, but about 6 months prior to that, they had eventually caught up with guys, cut them, tried them, and they were serving, and still are, a sentence in jail. So I finished packing my bags, and I sit down at my parents' bedside with a bottle of champagne that they did not know we owned, and 3 glasses, and we toast to the fact that a year ago, we were faced with the most literal manifestation of evil the world has thrown at us, and that we beat it. Then in a very short period of time, with very real stakes, relying on each other, and with a bit of luck, we had been able to develop hostage negotiation and other skills we never thought we would need to overcome the biggest problem the world had ever thrown at us. And that's something I've kept with me in the 2 years that I've been a postdoc here at MSK, especially transitioning from a life in Spanish to a life in English and to a clinical life to a research life. Every time a 3-week experiment fails, or every time I have to pick up a new set of skills, I remember the time that I had to really quickly and with real stakes pick up a set of skills. And I feel marginally less frustrated. And I also remember the important things, like calling my dad every morning, which I still do. And they're still pretty short conversations. How was your bike ride to work? How'd you sleep? Everything's fine. And he asks me how things are going in the lab. And I usually tell him that, science is hard. Like, really, really hard. And he always laughs and replies the same thing. Of course it is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be the guy for the job. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you to Gabriel and his very particular set of skills.
These stories have just been running over and over in my head. Last night I had a dream that my dad, who taught me Excel, was kidnapped, and I woke up, thankfully, to find him at his computer. It's great. It resonated with me, transported me into a dream world that was a little scary.
I have to say, I'm very inspired by all of the very positive and encouraging relationships that our storytellers and you have with your parents. It is very unfamiliar to me.
Oh, no. My mom can hug you after the show.
Maybe she can ask me if I'd like to do an MD, PhD program. My parents never asked me about that. When I was in grade school, we had an inventors fair at our school in lieu of the science fair. It was very high stakes. Everybody had to invent something. And when I first heard about this, I was very excited. I had a very good feeling that I was going to have the best invention of everybody in the class, based on a lot of positive feedback that I was getting at the time from Mrs. Grady, my teacher. And so
I love her.
I remained very confident all the way up until the day of the inventors fair, at which point I realized that I had failed to invent anything. Which is kind of a problem. And so I thought, what can I invent right here, right now, before the school bus comes in my kitchen? And the answer came to me, I can invent a sandwich. And so I invented the peanut butter and jelly surprise, which, in case you're interested, is exactly the same as the normal peanut butter and jelly sandwich, except, surprise, there's a piece of ham in the middle. Just what everybody wants, mid-peanut butter jelly sandwich. And so I only had time to make just one prototype, so no one could try it, which I think we can all agree is probably for the best. And I took this to school, where it continued to become soggier and soggier throughout the day, compared to everyone else's inventions, which were amazing, which were like self-cleaning litter boxes, things you would buy on the home shopping channel today. And I think that was the day when my mom decided she was never going to ask me if I was interested in an MD, PhD program.
I mean, I don't even know what to say. I just can't get the taste of peanut butter, jelly, and ham out of my mouth, and It's something that'll haunt me tonight.
Now you can have another dream.
Now I can have
inspired
another
by
dream.
this show.
Oh boy. Thankfully I'm vegetarian, so.
Well, are you ready for our third story of the night, everybody? All right. Our next storyteller is a patient care coordinator at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Please welcome to the stage Kristine Lycke.
That's good, right? I'm the youngest of her 4 children. She was concerned about the fact that I would be starting kindergarten. She was worried about having an empty nest long before empty nest syndrome was even a thing. I remember as spring turned into summer, tension in the house started growing. There was a lot of whispering, secret conversations, discussions happening behind closed doors. At some point, my parents sat me down and explained that she needed an operation. Beyond who would care for me in her absence, my father made it clear that questions were not welcome. I was to listen to my brothers and sister and be on my best behavior while my mother recovered. She came home in bandages all over her chest. She was frail and devastated. One of the most vivid memories I have is of her sitting in the living room in the dark on the couch crying. She was sobbing. But when I asked her what was the matter, she would respond with, "I'm just sad that you're going to start school soon." Another memory I have is her being devastated over the fact that she couldn't take us school shopping. She was forced to ask my aunt to take her place. As I started kindergarten, my mother started treatment. That's what they called it then, treatment. But every now and again, I'd hear someone refer to it as chemo. My mother didn't drive, so she was forced to have others take her. Her cousin Josephine was my favorite chauffeur. She would spend time playing with me during the hours that my mother spent receiving her treatment. Promises of bagels and Happy Meals kept me on my best behavior. But other times it was my mother's sister who would take us, and she would just drop us off at the hospital, leaving me to sit outside in a hallway, waiting for my mother for those hours she was enduring treatment. The surgeries and the treatment, they were torture for my mother. The days following treatment, she was so sick. But like my mother, she did her very best to keep it to herself. But I knew something was terribly wrong. The surgeries and treatment, they were devastating for my mother, but what really destroyed her was gossip. She had found out that a nurse who was working in the local hospital where she was treated had shared information, private, intimate information regarding her treatment with people at a local fire department dinner where my parents had been once active. Almost overnight, my parents decided to sell their house and move down to Williamsburg, Virginia. It was a place they loved dearly. And I can only guess now a place where she could really escape the cancer. Friends and family were told that she was in remission. We moved and started a new life. On June 25th, 1983, as the sun set, my sister and I were running around the house playing tag when my father and my brother pulled up. We ran to them, and my father, not being able to connect eye to eye, kind of blurted out, "Your mother passed away this afternoon." Not really understanding, I looked and I asked him, "When is Mommy coming home?" He couldn't look back. He couldn't respond. So it was my brother, Kevin, who looked at me and said, "Mommy isn't ever coming home. She died." Kevin took us in his room to talk, to console us, as he often did. And my father made phone calls and arrangements. We were to move back to New York immediately. I had never heard of a wake, let alone ever been to one. I remember holding her cold hand, and every now and again I would ask my father to lift me so I could kiss her gently on the cheek. I held it together pretty well for a kid until the morning of her funeral, when the funeral director closed the coffin. It was in that moment I realized the finality, that I would never see my mother again, that I would never hold her hand or kiss her cheek. The years after my mother died, my siblings and I tried to piece together the mystery that surrounded her illness. And as a teenager, I found her death certificate. I can't say that I was shocked when I found out it was breast cancer. I was angry that they hadn't shared the truth with us, but another part of me understood. See, this was 1983. Breast cancer wasn't about pink ribbons. It was about stigma and shame. And I understood why my mother might have wanted to keep it close, going back to that gossip and that shame and that devastation that she felt when people were talking about intimate details of her body. If anything good was to come of that, it was that I was vigilant in my screenings. Since age 25, I had endured mammograms that turned into ultrasounds, that turned into biopsies, that ultimately turned into nothing. So in August 2013, when I was nursing my then 10-month-old daughter and found a lump, I wasn't particularly alarmed. My OBGYN didn't hesitate, given my mother's history, and he ordered the mammogram. And again, I thought, this is just something that's going to turn into a sonogram, that's going to turn into a biopsy, that's going to turn into nothing. Except it was something. I called my wife and explained to her that they think it's cancer. She hurried to the breast imaging center. She made arrangements for my sister to take care of the baby. As I consented to the biopsy, the nurse asked me, how old was she when she was diagnosed? I quickly did the math in my head. She was 38. I was 38. I slowly choked back the tears, but came apart when I realized that I was going to die. She had died, and I was going to do to my child just as she had done to me. Except what's worse, my daughter won't even remember me. I remember waking up after surgery, and my surgeon, angel on earth, Alexandra here, was sitting at the bedside. She wasn't who I expected to see. So I knew it was bad news. And she explained that the cancer had spread from the breast to the lymph nodes. She reassured me that the prognosis was still the same. It was excellent, but that the treatment would change. I had already lost both breasts. Now I had to lose my hair. I endured 8 rounds of dose-dense chemotherapy and 33 rounds of radiation, multiple surgeries, and just to keep life interesting, an infection that landed me in the hospital for 5 days, which was probably the worst for me and my wife. I just want to mention that prior to surgery, I had found myself crying every day. The month between diagnosis and actual surgery is a living hell. You have this ticking time bomb in your chest and you just want it out. But I was a stay-at-home mom at the time with this young baby who I thought was going to be a head case because her mother kept crying. I reached out to one of the social workers at Sloan Kettering, and I explained to her, Roz Kleban, that I was afraid that I was causing great detrimental harm to my daughter. She assured me that Maddie would be just fine, that crying was okay, and that whether or not I cried, Maddie would know something was wrong with Mama anyway. Roz asked me, Kristine, what are you so afraid of? And I said, that I'm going to die. And she said, did anyone here say that you were going to die? Defensively, I shouted back, no. And she said, then stop living as if you are. That phone call with Roz changed everything. As she reminded me, it was my experience, my story. I was not her, and Maddie was not me. I became the author of my own life. None of it was easy, but I was blessed. Blessed with a devoted wife, an amazing daughter, an extended family who cared for us. And part of that extended family was everyone we encountered here at MSK. Part of what makes this difficult is that I carry the BRCA gene mutation. And so we don't know yet if my daughter carries the same mutation that killed my mother and caused my cancer. So we have devised a plan with the social workers here at Sloan Kettering to discuss with Maddie openly and honestly, with age-appropriate dialogue, how to cope with me having been diagnosed, lived through, and surviving cancer. Maddie's a pretty bright 6-year-old, and she asks some challenging questions. Lately, she's been asking, well, how'd you get cancer in the first place? I explained that I have a naughty gene that doesn't work the way that it normally does in most people, and it doesn't fight breast cancer effectively. And more recently, she asked me, do I have that naughty gene? And I responded like a punch to the gut, maybe. But I assured her that her mother and I, along with everyone here at MSK, will do our best, everything in our power, to make sure that she stays healthy. I'm not sure how my mother would feel about me standing here on this stage sharing her story. I hope she's proud of me. But what I know for sure is that she'd want her granddaughter to live a long and healthy life. I'm counting on this institution, this place that collectively saved my life, to fix this naughty gene, to prevent cancer, to find a cure. We can't do that alone. We can't do that by hiding, only by doing it together, openly and honestly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristine. I believe her wife and her daughter are here with us today. Wow. I love that Kristine was so inspired by the care that she received here that she went on to become a patient care coordinator with Memorial Sloan Kettering. I think that's a really beautiful thing.
And we are so honored that you've chosen to share your story with the community and with us at Story Collider. It really is tremendous privilege to get to work with you and all of our storytellers tonight.
Yes, when we began working on the show and we were sorting through all of the pitches, Miriam and I were blown away by how many amazing stories there were.
And
for
how
us to
many
choose
times
from.
we could cry over 2-paragraph long pitches thinking, God, these are 10-minute stories that span a lifetime.
Yeah. And so we hope to come back. We hope to do another show with Memorial Sloan Kettering. In the meantime, we hope that all of you will consider sharing your stories with us at our regular shows. We do a show once a month in New York at Caveat on Clinton Street downtown. It's actually tomorrow night because it is the first Tuesday of every month. We would love to see all of you there. We would love to hear from you about your stories. You can send us an email at stories@storyclider.org. We would love to share more of these.
Yeah. Whew. So I think on that, are you all ready to hear your next storyteller? Yeah. So your next storyteller is a nocturnist here at Sloan Kettering, and she is also a marathon runner. She just ran the New York City Marathon. So on that, give it up for Jamie Riches.
I work as an overnight hospitalist or a nocturnist at a cancer center, which essentially means that I manage all of the moving pieces to some of the worst days of your life. I work in 12-hour shifts, sometimes covering up to 60 or 70 patients a night, and my pager goes off over 100 times on most of those nights. I often meet my patients only once, and it's at the height of their illness and the depth of their fear, and sometimes only at their time of death. Tonight, I'm the doctor to the young adult daughter of a relatively seasoned mother, and she's dying. I'm called to the room at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning to evaluate respiratory failure. The patient's breathing too quickly and too heavily, and her oxygen levels too low. She's sitting in a position that medical students learn to call the tripod. Her chest is in flexion, and her elbows are supported by her knees. And Claire sits down in an armchair next to her daughter's bed, and I squat so I can look her in the eye. Claire's face is flushed, and her daughter's is cadaverous, yet swollen from steroids, without any sign of ever having a full head of hair. And the patient is holding a weathered teddy bear. She's childlike, yet she's wearing eyeliner. And the hospital room is divided just by a curtain, and the patient next door sleeps, while we walk through a series of discussions about what it means for the lungs to fail and the body to stop being able to breathe on its own. We use some of the same terminology: pleural effusions, pulmonary metastases, pneumonitis, because at this point, they've been treating this disease as long as I have. My pager's going off every couple of minutes, and I'm tapping the silence button as we speak, and the nurses are just carefully coordinating all of the chaos on the floor, and they're coming into the room, whispering all of the important things to me in the lulls in the conversation. Claire shows me a photograph from a recent vacation. Look, this was only 2 weeks ago, she says. And the patient looks vibrant and happy and terminally ill. And regularly, my patients and their family members show me pictures of what they looked like months or weeks before we meet. And it's a welcome opportunity for me because I get to see a glimpse of this life that I just cannot imagine during such a time of acute decompensation. And when Claire tells me that her daughter's strong, I believe her because I can see it. But strength cannot mitigate what is about to happen. We're at a crossroads, and I'm essentially asking her, which route would you like to take to death? the local or the express. We can intubate, let a ventilator do all of the work of breathing, but the patient will be sedated, and Claire and their family will most likely need to make the decision as to when to withdraw the respiratory support. We can focus solely on making this as comfortable and as painless as possible, but it's happening really quickly, and she'll most likely never see her father or any of her friends ever again. The CT is an avalanche. Air in the lungs on a CAT scan appears black, and multiple lung tumors, malignant fluid, and collapsed airways have covered the space in white. Up until this point, the patient's treatment has been the result of incredible advances in science, which I am so proud to witness and to be a part of. The brakes to her immune system were released, and the cancer grew under siege. And this is the part for which there is no molecular targeted therapy. This is the part that hurts. And my job is to target the physical and the emotional symptoms that cause that pain. My job is to protect her dignity and her humanity. And every moment we wait feels like my own personal failure. Claire shows me another photograph, and she shatters. She thinks that this trajectory is her fault for spending a weekend in a dusty old cabin. I almost plead with her, no, this is not your fault. And we stand united in the same exact fear. Did I cause you to suffer? When I come back into the room, after stepping out for a minute to talk to the interventional radiology consultant for a patient who developed sudden onset paralysis from a hematoma in his leg, and another patient who needed some more fluid because his blood pressure was dangerously low. I have a moment of insecurity where I wish I could just tell Claire that I stepped out because I was dealing with other issues that under any other circumstances would be considered emergent. Because this was something that I felt deserved my undivided attention. I felt guilty because I couldn't be in more than one place at one time. Claire's view is myopic. It's exactly the way it should be. She asks me to defend every opinion I give and every decision ever made by any member of the care team from her daughter's admission date until today. When I suggest that we do a blood gas because I'm sure that her blood has become acidic and the carbon dioxide is building up to a point that won't allow her much more awake time, she asks me why nobody else has ever suggested this blood gas before. And when I call the ICU, she asks me if the pulmonary critical care doctor is an oncologist. No, he isn't, I say. Well, then he shouldn't be talking about the cancer in her lungs. She tells me that I don't know her daughter and that she's looked like this before and she's been okay. She's right. I don't know her daughter. I don't know her hopes or her fears, her successes or her failures. I know her pathology. And she doesn't know just how much I care nonetheless. We move on to the mask, and despite breathing with the pressure of a BiPAP, The rise and fall of Claire's daughter's chest is a gallop, and her neck muscles have taken on all of the role in her work of breathing. At the end of the night, I put my hand on Clara's shoulder and she cries and thanks me for being calm. And what I really wish that I could tell her is that I'm in awe of her composure, and that I hope that if, God forbid, I'm ever in her position, that I will fight for my daughter with the ferocity that she did that night and in those months and years. That she didn't make any mistakes, that the last-minute vacations and parties were not a strain on her daughter's heart or lungs. They were the last celebrations of her life. That she did her best, and it was everything she could do. That she's strong. That's where her daughter inherited her strength. But instead, I say none of that. I habitually bow my head and fold my hands and walk away. And it occurs to me that as a former Catholic, the entire foundation of my empathy is built upon years of devotion to the image of a mother watching her son die. And I walk into the stairwell and I cried for 5 flights. It's not the first time I've cried in that stairwell. It will not be the last. And as I made my way home on the FDR watching the sunrise, I suspended my agnosticism for a moment just to admire the glistening requiem. Let perpetual light shine upon them, and may they rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you.
Everyone making good use of these tissue boxes yet?
I am.
Before we continue, can we just give all of our storytellers tonight a round of applause for sharing these moments of their lives with us? We're so grateful to them for being willing to share these stories with us. Really, really personal, really intimate, really powerful stories.
Yeah, and if any of you have caught the storytelling bug tonight, I would really encourage you to check out our podcast, which drops every Friday with 2 stories from our live stages all around the world. And I'm so grateful to get to work for Story Collider, where so many people have taken a chance on us and shared their beautiful, deeply personal, and also hilarious moments with us. So it's a real honor and privilege.
Yeah, you can find our podcast at storycollider.org. We've got our full library of over 300 episodes. You can also find it at iTunes, Stitcher, the NPR One app, all the places where you find all your favorite podcasts.
Yeah.
So with all of that said, we have one more story for you tonight. Are you ready for it? Our next storyteller is an attending surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering who has cared for more than 5,000 patients over his 20-year career. He has also given more than 500 lectures, but tonight is the first time he's telling a story. Please welcome Bhuvanesh Singh to the stage.
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can talk after all that. I'm going to first thank both Miriam and Erin for all the advice they gave. They said, don't have more than 1 drink. No comment. They said, don't grab the microphone or pull it around. No comment. They said, don't use props. Ed, can I have my first set of slides, please? I'm going to have to use props. I'm sorry. You have to cut to cure. That was a mantra. That was the central focus of all of my surgical training. That's what I was being taught. When I first met Alice, I had finished 4 years of medical school. I had finished 6 years of residency training, and I was deep into a 2.5-year fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering. So the way that I thought about my role as a surgeon was pretty well established. I knew my job. My job was, of course, to cut to cure. That's what I was meant to do. Now, Alice had cancer of the tongue, and she was very atypical. So first off, she was very young. She was only 36, and most people who have tongue cancer are older, and they tend to be smokers and drinkers, and Alice clearly was not. So that made her different. Oh, there was actually one other thing that made her different. Alice was pregnant. Okay, it's going to be tough. I'm sorry. So as I walked into her room, she was talking to her husband. She was going over the details of everything that he needed to do while she was in the hospital. As I watched her, she was confident. She was focused. She was completely in control of everything that was going on in the room. So I did what I had done so many times before. I started to take her history. I started to fill out the paperwork that was required to get her ready for surgery. That, as a fellow, that was my job, and that's what I needed to do. And of course, as I did this, I kept my interaction professional, surgical, efficient. Let me get this done so we can move on to the really important stuff, which is the actual operation. Alice, though, she wasn't having any of that. She wanted much more than this fact-filled surgical interaction. And you see, Alice was a real force, and I quickly realized I had no choice but to sit and talk with her. There was no other opportunity for me. And so we ended up talking for a while, and when we first started talking, all I can think was, man, this is so inefficient. I have so much other work to do. But as we talked, her guards came down. And as I think back, so did mine. She told me about her 2-year-old son. She told me about her pregnancy, and I told her about my family. You see, I was about the same age. I also had a 2-year-old son, and my wife and I were expecting our second child. So the similarities were obvious, and for those reasons and for many, many more, we were obviously completely connected. And so we kept talking until her husband finally left the room, and when he did, her voice cracked. And I looked at her, and there was sheer terror in her eyes. She brought back her tears. She said to me that she had to live. She had to live because she had to take care of her son, and she had to take care of her unborn child. This situation was clearly not familiar to her. She was used to being in control. She was trying to hold on. She was trying to stay strong. She was trying not to show her fear so that her husband wouldn't worry. That interaction really affected me, and at first I really didn't understand why. The one thing I knew at the end of that, though, is that I had to make sure that Alice was going to be okay. At that point, what that meant to me was that I had to make sure that her surgery went perfectly. The next day, Alice came into the operating room, and everyone was drawn to her. Her personality and her situation really broke through. Even the hardest in the room couldn't help but be drawn in and completely connected to her. And at some point, the room completely became silent. Everybody knew what was at stake. Everybody was doing their part to make sure that Alice was going to be okay and that she did well. The normal banter in the room wasn't there. The room felt completely silent. You can hear a pin drop in that room. I was hiding in a corner. I was going over the steps of the operation in my head, and Alice saw me, and she called out, and she asked me to come over. And as I did, I desperately tried not to make eye contact with her. Maybe I didn't want her to see the concern that was in my eyes. Or maybe I didn't want to see the fear that were in her eyes. But Alice was a force. I had no choice. I walked over to the table and I held her hand. And as I did, from behind my mask, I said, Alice, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Everything will be okay. Those words completely reassured her, and I felt her relax. And as she went off to sleep, she thanked everyone. And we were ready. Alice needed a complicated 5-hour operation. This involved taking out part of her tongue. It involved taking out the lymph nodes in her neck. And as a fellow, my responsibility was to help the attending surgeon and learn about the procedure and the process. But on that day, instead of assisting, I slowly took over. Nobody stopped me. You see, this was Alice. And it was my job to make her better. There wasn't anyone in the world that was going to do better than me that day. The surgery that day, it flowed like artwork. The room was absorbed. Everybody was watching the brushstrokes as the instruments were moving across the field. Every structure, even those that we normally don't even think about, were carefully identified and preserved. At the end, the cancer was completely removed. All the margins were clear. The surgical field was flawless. And even my typically very harsh and very judgmental attending had to stop and take notice. On that day, I was perfect. So, of course, we celebrated the surgical success with Alice and her family. We all felt that a weight had been lifted and a sense of order was somehow restored. To no one's surprise, Alice's recovery went way ahead of schedule. She was eating and speaking normally in 2 days. She was out of the hospital in 4 days. And a week later, she flew home with her family and went back to her normal life. later, as I thought about what had just happened, I felt completely satisfied. I felt like I had done my job. I had no doubt in my mind that Alice and her family would now be okay. I had cut, and of course, now that meant that Alice would be cured. And that's what I expected. In fact, that's what everyone expected. A few months passed. I was still a fellow. I was actively involved in my training. Under the heavy workload of the day and the countless surgeries that I was performing, Alice slowly became a distant memory. My experience with her, though, left me with a strong sense that surgery was indeed my primary purpose. I remained focused towards perfecting the precision and the efficiency of using cold steel to best care for the patients that I was treating. So one day, after a long case in the operating room, I was making rounds on the hospital floor, and an older woman came running across the floor. And as I watched her, I saw she was hiding something under her coat. And I looked closer, she was hiding a baby under her coat. Now, the hospital can be a very dangerous place for babies. So I ran after her with a sense of urgency. And as I got to the room where she was going in, I had a whole lecture ready for her to say why she was doing this and how dangerous she was. But when I walked in, my eyes were drawn to this gaunt and frail woman sitting in the hospital bed. She was in obvious pain. She was having trouble breathing. She was gasping for air. Her hair was frazzled and her eyes were barely open, but when she saw me, she perked up and she smiled. At first, I didn't recognize her. But when I looked in her eyes, I realized who she was. I felt my knees buckle. The room started spinning and I had to steady myself. There in the bed was Alice. She was barely recognizable. The woman that had been running across the floor was her mother, and the baby was her 6-week-old son that her mother was bringing to be with her. Alice's cancer had unfortunately progressed. I'd seen this look before. I knew exactly what it meant. And I saw in Alice's eyes, she also realized what was going on. Alice was dying. I was in complete shock. I was completely overwhelmed. I remember running out of the room and somehow find my way to a bathroom, and I locked the door. And then I completely broke down. I cried for what felt like hours. And at that moment, I began to replay every step in Alice's care, every step of her operation. I did everything right. In fact, I did everything perfectly. Why was she here? When I finally gathered myself, I washed away any evidence I was crying. I put on a brave face, and when I got to her room, I took a deep breath. And I went in, and Alice was really happy to see me. I just couldn't figure out why. I was so disappointed in myself. So I hid my shame as we talked, and she filled me in on what had happened. She had flown home. Unfortunately, the pathology from the surgery has shown that the cancer has spread to the lymph nodes. Because of this, she had to endure 7 weeks of very damaging and debilitating radiation therapy. But despite this aggressive treatment, the cancer had spread to her lungs. And at this point, I knew that there was absolutely no hope for curing her. As I sat in her room, I really struggled to control my emotions. Alice, on the other hand, she was as strong as ever. She was completely focused. She told me she had one goal. And she wanted my help to stay alive long enough to reach that goal. She wanted to write letters and make videos so that her sons could read those letters and watch the videos for each of their birthdays until they turned 18 years old. What she wanted to do was make sure that her sons knew their mother. She wanted them to appreciate how much she loved them. And even though she wasn't going to be there, she wanted to make sure that they were somehow taken care of. Over the next few days, I checked on Alice regularly, every free minute I had. I did everything I could to help her stay alive. She was so strong. The levels of her pain were unimaginable. But she refused to take any pain medications because she wanted to stay focused and alert enough so that she could write letters and make the videos for her sons. I often watched her from outside her room. I saw her smiling and joking into the camera. She was putting on a brave face so her sons would see her in a good way. As she shared her feelings and her advice, she looked into the camera as if though she was looking at her boys. And I really prayed that her boys would see her eyes that were so full of hope, and her smile that was so infectious, and not the obvious pain and sorrow that she was desperately trying to hide. The time for me with Alice was incredibly challenging. I really began to think I had made a mistake. I felt I had failed, and that was difficult for me to overcome. Well, you see, Alice, she somehow knew exactly what I was thinking. And late one night when we were talking, she paused. She looked up at me. She took a hold of my hand. And she told me, "It's okay." It's okay. She told me how much she appreciated everything I had done for her, and especially the time that I had spent with her, and how much she valued the care that I had given to her. Almost as if so she could read my mind, she reassured me, and she asked me to take care of others like I had taken care of her. Her words were powerful. They were healing. Much more so than any scalpel or medicine that I had that I could give her. You know, at that moment, instead of me taking care of her, she was actually taking care of me. Even at the end, she felt better by making sure that those around her were taken care of, including me. So through sheer will, over the next 3 days, Alice made all of her videos and completed all of her letters. I don't think you'll ever appreciate how difficult this was for her to do. And when she finished, she was elated, and we all celebrated. And a few hours later, she died. I cried with her family, and I cried so many times after that, I just lost count. It's hard to believe, but that was over 20 years ago. It really feels like yesterday. This is actually the first time I've been able to share Alice's story in public, and I really felt the need to share her story. Because you see, Alice helped me appreciate the most important thing about being a doctor. She made me realize that it's not about precision and cold steel, but rather about easing fears. It isn't about cutting the cure, but about caring and using hugs and laughter to heal. I feel so privileged to do what I do now. But today, I see my role as a surgeon very differently. It's my job to help people during their most difficult time. It's my job to try and help them heal. I guess it's my job to try and do exactly what Alice did for me.
Thank you so much, Bhuvanesh.
Thank you.
Man, everybody, that is our show. Thank you so much for being a part of it with us. We have really loved so much getting to work with this community and put together this show. It has really, I think, moved both of us in a really profound way. So really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Before we go, we want to give a few thank yous that I hope you all join us in. We want to thank everybody, all the staff of this auditorium. We want to thank Ed and Sebastian and Morgan back there in the booth, helping us with sound and lighting and recording. We want to thank June over here, taking photos of us as we speak. Thank you
Hope
very
you
much.
got our good angles.
We want to thank everybody at Memorial Sloan Kettering who made this possible, especially Yahara and Ushma and Jill
Jill.
and everybody from the whole team. Thank you so much.
And another thank you to our storytellers and to all of you for coming and bearing witness to their stories.
Thank you so much, everybody.